haircut.
We're not.
No, quite.
Oh, there we are. Can't be any worse than mine.
Right, members, I think we're streaming.
Are we streaming now? Good. Thank you, Stephen. Right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to you all, members of the public watching this. In the first instance, I need to read you a short announcement around the holding of this meeting. The local authorities and police and crime panels, coronavirus, close brackets, open brackets, flexibility of local authority and police and crime panel meetings, close brackets, open brackets, England and Wales, close brackets, regulations came into force on Saturday, the 4th of April, 2020, in order to enable councils to hold remote committee meetings during the COVID-19 pandemic period. This was to ensure local authorities could conduct business during this current public health emergency. This meeting of the licensing committee is being held remotely under those regulations via the Zoom application and is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. So welcome to those members of the public and residents that are watching us this evening. From there, do we have any apologies? Looking to William.
I haven't received any, Chair, but I think we are missing.
I believe we have apologies from Councillor Jones.
Okay, thank you.
I should note that if he appears, then obviously that's not relevant. But I think Councillor Jones has offered apologies.
Okay, and Councillor Hall we don't have, but apart from that, I think we're fine. Thank you.
Okay. Would you join me in approving the minutes of the meeting of the committee held last on Wednesday, the 25th of November, 2020? And may I, if you're so minded, can I have a proposer and seconder, please?
Happy to second, David.
Thank you. Proposed, Rosemary, seconded, Ken. Thank you so much. Chairman's announcements, mercifully short. Excuse me, I'm still recovering from a chest infection. Mercifully short. You indicated, Marnie, do you wish to speak at this point? It's not normal in Chairman's announcements, but.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just thought we should have voted. It was proposed and seconded, and then we should have.
Oh, I see what you mean. I beg your pardon. Yes, you're absolutely right. Yeah, point of order. Well done. Yeah. You're right. Yeah. Does anybody vote against? That's the quickest way. Yes, thank you. Nina, you're quite right. Thank you so much. All agreed?
Yeah.
Show will. Thank you so much. Marnie, I'm obliged to you. Declarations of interest. The desire to canter on. Do any members have any declarations of interest? I'm getting a nil return on that. Thank you so much. Okay, in that case, it's again accepting minutes of the licensing subcommittee committees held on the 20th of November 2020, the 9th of December 2020, the 8th of January 2021, and the 5th of February 2021. And as you know, unusual as it may seem, we don't actually have to have been on those to agree them. So if everyone is content, could somebody please propose en bloc?
These are just
and second en bloc.
No.
Chris, were you proposing? And Ben seconding, I have. You concur with that? Thank you very much. We'll now go to the Department of Transport Statutory Taxi and Private Hire Vehicle Standards consultation responses, pages 65 to 68 in the report, to be the discussion to be opened by Oliver, and we'll take comments, and I certainly have a few at the end. Oliver, please talk us through this piece of work, if you'd be so kind.
Thank you, Chair. So following the Department of Transport issuing their new statutory taxi and private hire vehicle standards, we brought some proposals before the last licensing committee at the last meeting, which were then put out to consultation. During the 8-week consultation on the proposed amendments, 8 responses were received, and these are detailed in Appendix B of the report, and the appendix also includes the officer responses to each. As a result of the responses, some minor changes have been made to the proposals, which I'll highlight to members. Operators' licence conditions have been amended so that the requirement to record the name of the passenger is broadened to aid compliance. One of the operator that responded explained that in certain circumstances they may not have the name of a passenger. So, for example, if a hotel has a deal with a company and they book, they may not have the name. If someone makes a group booking to take a group to a particular event, they wouldn't have all of the passenger's name or even one of the passenger's names if it was a corporate job. So they suggested that this was a slightly too tight a definition. Officers agreed, so we've widened it slightly. You can see the amended recommendation, which is recommendation F, and it'll be 0.6 I. So we can go on to that shortly. So we also amended the requirement for an English proficiency test for drivers at renewal. It was pointed out in one of the responses that this may be quite onerous for drivers that have been driving for 20 years without any issues with regards to their English capabilities and proficiency. However, the DFT do say that this should be applied to all licence holders. So what we've done is we've said we'll make an exemption for people that provide a suitable English qualification. So those are detailed in the recommendations so that it's clear to people what qualifications we'll accept. Again, an application would be accepted on its own merits and reviewed on its own merits if a different qualification than those listed was applied for. So it's not a block to applications or renewals. That's recommendation C at point 2, which is page 72. So all of the recommendations are in Appendix A and have been amended as I've just detailed. Although it didn't form part of the, or doesn't form part of the recommendations, we did ask some questions around the use of CCTV in licensed vehicles, which is brought up in the DFT standards. 3 out of the 8 respondents answered this point and were broadly supportive. The member of the trade that commented said that it shouldn't be mandated. As I stated at the last licensing committee, officers will be holding a separate consultation later in the year to identify if the local circumstances indicate that the installation of CCTV in vehicles would have a positive or adverse effect on the safety of taxi and private hire vehicle users, including children and vulnerable adults, and obviously taking into account the potential privacy issues. I think that summarises where the responses can be found and the amendments that officers are proposing. So I'll happily take any questions, Chair.
Well, firstly, I'd like to thank you and the officers responsible for this report. It's very comprehensive. It's very thorough. Thank you. I look to the floor. I look to the chamber. Chris, yes, I thought you might be early out the trap because I know this is a favourite of yours. Yeah, please take us into this.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Oliver. I think the amendments seem very sensible, first of all, as a response to the comments that have been made. I do have to apologize for reverting back to the same thing I said last meeting, but I do want to revert back to where we are at present differing from the statutory standards or proposing to, which would be for drugs convictions. So you're looking at the ones that are intent to supply, excuse me, or other offences to supplying drugs, and also the possession of drugs. I think with intent to supply, I believe it is, we're saying revoke, whereas the guidance says, or review, sorry, the guidance says 10 years.
Sorry to talk over you. Chris?
Yeah.
Chris, sorry to talk over you. Could you just take us to where that is on the report so that we can all be on the same page? Sorry, it'd be helpful if you've got a note of it.
Have that in front of me.
Oh, okay. Well, don't worry. No, that's fine.
Yeah. So it's the drugs convictions are differing from the statutory guidance, and then with the possession, it's 5 years free of conviction for the statutory guidance, and it's 10 years free for our present guidance. And then I can show you where it is on the report in terms of sections 5.1 and 5.2 of the report, which is to do with risk. On that risk register, if you like, it says that if we fail to consult about any changes or differences between us and the statutory guidance, then we have a risk to court action. And also if we differ without any locally compelling reasons from the statutory guidance, then there's a risk as well. Now that to me is not only in one direction. So if we were to not to meet the minimum standards, clearly that would be risky if we weren't to say that we would be as harsh as the statutory guidance. But here we're being harsher. So if a driver was to say get revoked or indeed refused, and he said but the statutory guidance says differently, and then takes a judicial review of our guidance, we'd have to have, in my mind, potentially a locally compelling reason to why we're different from the rest of the country and the guidance that's been put in place. So in other words, is there a locally compelling reason why people who take drugs are more likely to be dangerous in East Herts? And I can't think of one. So I just wanted to raise that point.
Thank you. Yeah, I was looking at that as well. I take a harder line than you're suggesting, but I do take the point. When you've got somebody in this position, there is a great deal of responsibility. But Oliver, could you respond to that? Are you able to respond in position to respond to that?
I take the point that it could be open to challenge. We've previously consulted on it, on being stricter, so we're not actually making a change at this time. The DFT have said that it's minimum standards, so you can go above. But I do appreciate your point that we may need to demonstrate locally why we made that decision. So I would, if I can have the opportunity to look back at how the decision was reached, because it was made by the licensing committee and the consultation that was then, I'll be able to answer your question in more detail outside of this meeting, because I don't have that directly in front of me right now. But it's a perfectly valid point that it would be open to challenge either way if we couldn't justify it.
Thank you.
I'm not sure I agree with it, but I absolutely agree that we should look at it. That's fine. Marnie, I can see a physical and an electronic.
Thank you very much,
Please.
Chair. Yes, I'd like to support what Chris has said. It does seem to me not quite right that we should be imposing standards which are stricter and harsher than some of the national proposed standards. And this point has been made by several of the respondents to the recent consultation. They were all saying that they thought this penalty, this barring for more than 7 years and 10 years was unnecessarily harsh. And I do believe if people apply for a further license, each case would be assessed on its own merits anyway, and then surely we would have the ability to impose a longer barring period if we thought that was necessary. So yes, so I welcome the fact that Mr. Rawlings says he will look again at the evidence just to make sure that we are being sensible and that we are being fair to everybody. So thank you, Oliver, for saying you will have another look. Thank you.
If I could briefly respond to your point. So the standards that we've currently got that are a higher level were fully consulted on and approved by licensing committee and have been through full council. If we want to review those, that's fine. Any changes that were part of this are to bring us to what is considered to be the DFT minimum standard. So where people have responded saying they think that the penalty for handheld devices is too high, is actually the minimum that the DFT requires that we're consulting on. So that's why we haven't gone below, because it's not a compelling local reason just because some respondents think it's too much. If we had, it would need to be something more than that for us to go below the minimum standard. But I perfectly second what you're saying.
Yes, indeed. And while I say I minded personally to take a hard line on this, we did some 10 years ago have an individual come to us who had some experience in being lured into transporting drugs and had actually served a prison sentence as a result of it. But he gave a very good account of himself to the licensing subcommittee. And after considerable discussion, he was allowed to have a license. And I have to say that he respected the trust we put in him, and we never heard any bad news from him ever again. So that was, you know, we always have the flexibility in specific situations to look at that. That's good. I'm looking around. I can't see anyone else. So can I just raise a few points myself? I'll come back to you, Marnie, if I may. Can I just raise a few points myself? Can I invite everybody to go to page 66, 2.2, the first bullet point? Because I have to admit, I was troubled when I read that that first sentence, there is evidence to support the view that taxis and private hire vehicles are a high-risk environment in terms of risks to passengers. I think that brings us firmly back to the sort of responsibilities that rest on the authority, the officers, and ourselves in this regard. And you know, bearing that in mind, in going to 3.2, I'm frankly disappointed at the response to the consultation. Not entirely unexpected, but I cannot hide my disappointment. When you look at the group of people that we went out to, it numbers hundreds in terms of people directly affected, namely the people in the trade, whether they be drivers or operators or people that work in taxi offices, community groups, the pub watches, etc., etc. And I really do feel that going forward, we need to challenge those groups as to whether, in fact, they are engaging with, well, they're clearly not engaging with the process. So I think there's some work to be done around that. If we go to, you know, we got the responses 3.1 to 3.14. They were interesting. I found those helpful, and clearly they've fed into the process. But again, to have so few, what was it, 8, 9, Oliver, in the end? I mean, frankly, it beggars belief. We put a great deal of time and effort. The authority puts a great deal of time, effort, and quite naturally, expense follows that, into setting the appropriate standards. The DFT acknowledge that this is a higher risk environment. I think we need to do a piece of work around how we increase the engagement, and that may not be work for the licensing committee itself, but elsewhere in the authority. The recommendations are all on. Go on. Say again?
I'm not certain if it's Ken. I'm not certain if you made it clear what your problem is with 2.2. You read out that it's a high risk environment. What was the point you were trying to make?
Well, I don't have a problem with 2.2. I'm very concerned that the DFT acknowledge that being a passenger in a taxi is a high risk environment.
Potentially, but
I would not put my family into what I considered, or had been suggested to me, was a high risk environment. And yet here we have the DFT states the following in the introduction of the document: there is evidence to support the view that taxis and private hire vehicles are a high risk environment for passengers.
I think,
well, not in my district, they're not.
Well, there's a reason for that, isn't there, David? And that there's a word missing there, that it potentially is a high risk environment. But I think with our licensing regulations and monitoring, which is second to none, that has eliminated the risk, hasn't it? Largely.
I don't think it's eliminated, but the point, yes, I agree. We would hope that we have reduced that risk to a point where it's well below acceptable.
So there's a word missing.
Notwithstanding,
there's a word missing.
Well, I don't know.
Potential high risk.
Is there a word missing? Well, let's look to the officers. Oliver, is there a word missing? No. What I'm going to come on to basically is the concerns I have. If we go to page 80. I'm concerned about bullet point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, I'm concerned about this generally because, you know, you phone a taxi office and say, can I have a cab on Thursday morning at 7 o'clock to take my family to Gatwick because we're going skiing for a fortnight. Now, you've just revealed your address and how long you're going to be away for. And the fact that you're going skiing suggests that you might have some nice goodie. You've got, you know, you've got assets. You might have some nice goodies in the house. Now, that sort of information is bandied about all the time. But now we find where bookings and dispatch is outsourced. So I'm very, very pleased that we've brought this in, that they are vetted to the same level as if they worked directly for the operator. But my concern is, are we able to actually control that? And that I'll stop at that point to give Oliver a chance to respond, because I'm sure he'll, with his experience, he'll have a lot more knowledge of this than I.
It would be
Over to you, Oliver.
Sorry, it would be for the operator that was outsourcing to be able to produce the evidence to us. So as with all of these licenses, we have a right to inspection and a right to question how they're operating. So we would expect, if we contacted them, for them to be able to provide us with all of the relevant details to show that there's exactly the same standards with the people they are outsourcing to as there are in their office. There's not a requirement for them to tell us they're outsourcing, and it's been happening for a substantial period of time.
Right.
But possibly that's something we can look at in the future, is where they outsource, is making it mandatory as part of the conditions of their license that they have to tell us.
I would be comforted by that, because I mean, it's bad enough. Well, it's not bad enough, the incorrect use of language, but it's challenging enough where you have
Sorry, we've got some interference. We can't quite hear you. Chairman, we can't hear you.
Chairman, you're on mute.
We can't hear you.
I know that's because somebody muted me. I'm back in the room. I can quite understand why. I'm better seen than not heard. That has been explained to me since the age of about 12. Notwithstanding, I can handle rejection, but this medication stretches it somewhat. Yeah, no, it's just that extra factor of the outsourcing that gives me a little bit of concern. So maybe that's something we can know. I may be overreacting here. It may not be a major concern. We've got fairly few offices involved in East Herts, but I just think it's something we should think about. I've got other points as well, but I'm going to give way to Miney here. Miney, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question from the main document under 3.10. This was comments made by one of the respondents, and this respondent was applauding the steps being taken and supports compulsory use of CCTV, and then made reference to the issue of grooming gangs and a number of suggested steps the authority could take to address this risk. I just would like to know, please, what were those steps which were suggested, because there might be some good ideas there which maybe we could consider. So it's 3.10, and I wonder if our officers can tell us, please, what those suggested steps were.
If we can go down to Appendix B, you can read the actual text of the response. I'm afraid I don't know it off by heart, so I'll just get down to it now.
Give us a page number.
It would be
the original
84.
Yeah, that was the original response.
So that's where they've suggested that.
But what is our response to that? That's the response to the consultation. What is our? I think Miney wants to get a feeling for what it is we are doing that might prevent that happening here.
No, I wanted to know what your ideas were. Sorry, I can't find it in Appendix B.
Yeah, it's response number 4, page 84. So they've suggested the compulsory use of video cameras and for drivers to wear cameras as the police do. When applying for a licence, drivers should be warned that they will be monitored and that at a hint of any bad behaviour, they'll be treated severely. And of course, they should have a clean record before getting a licence. Maybe pressure could be applied to the police to make this a priority so that it doesn't become a huge problem involving thousands of children as it has in Rotherham. So the officer response to that was to explain everything that we do with safeguarding, the training that we do and the guidance that we give at the start, the relationship we have with police, links to the suitability policy so they could see how we deal with offences should they be committed, and an explanation that even if there isn't a conviction, we can still review people's licences. I hope that answers the question.
But of course, I hope so too. But on the back of that, of course, we still have no facility nationally to record drivers that have got themselves into a pickle in one particular district or borough or licensing area, who can, fairly easily, but often just nip over the border into another licensing area, and carry on. Sorry, Marnie, did you want to come back on that?
Well, thank you, Chairman. Just to clarify then, so the suggestion from response number 4 just was that we should make better use of CCTV. Was that what it was?
Well, thank you for that. You've segued me very nicely, and I'll send you the money in a brown envelope later, but you've segued me very nicely into what I wanted to go on from here, which is, do I detect an appetite that we should start seriously thinking about CCTV in the vehicles that we license? I've put a great deal of attention to this over the last many years, 5 or 6, I think, to my certain knowledge, and considered it from a number of different angles, be it passenger, be it operator, be it driver. And I can see absolutely no negatives. Occasionally we hear about the loss of privacy, and I do get that, but almost invariably when you got into the taxi, you were on a CCTV camera, and you probably had been all the time you were out shopping or going to the theatre or going wherever you were, to the dentist or whatever. So to suggest that there's a loss of privacy because you get into a taxi which has got CCTV is probably, to my view, a moot point. I can see lots and lots of positives, especially where we are in a very, very rural area. I think it's good for the driver, undoubtedly good for the passenger. And I can't see why we would wish not to move forward on that. We don't necessarily have to make it mandatory at this stage, but we could certainly begin to get the trade aware of the fact that is where we're going. And I would imagine that in future, when taxis or vehicles that are made specifically for the taxi and licensed trade come forward, they will have cameras in them. There was a lot of argument around data protection and various bits and pieces, but I think most of those have now been thoroughly thought through, and it's got a lot of potential. Chris?
Yeah, I guess I don't really disagree with what you're saying. I think the problem with it being mandatory could be cost, something I'd say, especially at the moment. Trade's suffering pretty badly, so if they have to bear the cost of it, that's quite onerous. Yeah,
absolutely. I totally get that, and now is not the time to do it, which is why I'm not suggesting 1st of April everybody has to have a camera. But I think we can set a timeline. I think we can start to say to the trade, by 2025, you should really be thinking. They'll all have new vehicles by then, but the vast majority of them will have moved on to newer vehicles. We will expect them to be more environmentally friendly, and I can see no reason at all why, given that the DFT, and notwithstanding Ken's comment that there might be a word missing, given that the DFT have identified taxis and private hire vehicles as a potential area of concern. I can't see why we don't make it. We shouldn't be starting to make it very, very clear to the trade in the same way as we expect them to upgrade their environmental standards and their professional standards through being able to express themselves effectively in English, having the appropriate DBS and what have you behind them. Why we don't have a timeline for them to begin to realise that we need in-cab CCTV, and the costs are dropping like a brick. The cost of this is dropping exponentially. The cost will be on us as an authority in actually monitoring it. Little bit additional cost, but you know, for the installation, I think it'll just be another feature of the average cabbie's day. I put it out to you to comment, members. Rosemary, and then I'll take Ken.
Well, Ken put his hand up first.
Oh, did he? I'm sorry, I missed you, Ken.
Yeah.
No, I'm not worried. Rosemary, ladies first.
Oh, what a gentleman! Thank you. I just want to say how supportive I am of this idea. I think it would be a really good move, and it would help protect the taxi drivers as well. You know, if people start complaining about them, it gives them some evidence. And I know a lot of taxi drivers are abused cruelly, so I'm very supportive of this idea. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think we need to take this forward this evening. I think it's something that we can ask officers to look at, and perhaps they can come forward with recommendations at an early future meeting. But I think we have some plans in place. Ken.
Yes, David. I'm really big. Chris has made the point about the financial aspect of it, and I think that's pretty valid actually. And we also need to look at what problems have we had with taxi drivers, and what is the burning need to actually consider it at this stage. And I think you're right. Now is not the right time to do it. Just to be absolutely certain, this would be video camera and not sound. Otherwise, there'd be a massive intrusion on personal liberty. So if we are ever going to think about that, I do suggest that it's video only, no sound. Last thing I want is a taxi driver listening to my drivel at 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah, no, very valid point. But I think actually you'll find that the equipment now can be purchased and installed for the price of about 3 tankfuls of diesel. So I don't think you'll find the price, certainly a lot less than a set of tyres. As for the privacy, there are an enormous number of options that have been developed over the years, and I entirely agree. In the first instance, it would be CCTV only. However, a lot of these systems now have a series of buttons, one on the dashboard or the steering wheel and one on each of the rear doors, so that a passenger can switch on the audio. And it's very, very clear to everybody in the cab that the audio has been switched on. Because sometimes the audio is very much part of the deal. And to just give you some examples, and this really talks against the point, because this was purely the CCTV. But in Brighton, a murder was actually solved by the CCTV from a taxi. And it wasn't a murder that took place in the taxi. It was a murder that took place outside of the taxi, but the taxi CCTV caught it, and the evidence was critical. But no, you be assured, Ken, the systems are very sophisticated now, and you're absolutely right. I wouldn't want my every utterance in a cab to be a matter of record. But there is the facility to switch that on, so that if somebody in the cab, and it's just probably more used by the drivers themselves than the passengers, I would suggest. And we did have somebody a couple of years ago, and we have had runners. Somebody picks up a cab in a town in East Herts, heads towards North London, and 3 burly lads remonstrate with the driver, grab his bag, and then do a runner without paying the fare. So he's lost his takings for the night. thus far, and doesn't get his 40 quid fare for taking them back to wherever. So there's a lot. It's not just about the more obvious things. There's a lot of elements to it as well. That particular cab driver strangely became very, very keen on CCTV after that incident, as I would suspect quite a number would. But I would just like to encourage us to be thinking about that. It's come up in today's papers. I think that's a good point to raise it. Just to be thinking about that with a view to receiving something coming forward in the future. Oliver.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back on a couple of points briefly. There is now a national register of revoked and refused drivers, which is called NR3.
Oh, fantastic.
It's run
Yes.
by NAFIN. The only issue with it is that not all local authorities have signed up to it. So currently, all of our data about revoked and refused drivers is on that system, so it can be checked by any other local authority that's registered on it. And we check every new and every renewal applicant's name against that list, because they may have been licensed with another authority simultaneously with us, revoked by them for something that they haven't told us about. If it's on NR3, then we can ask those appropriate questions. So there is a register which is improving all the time. And on the point of CCTV, as an authority, we've been promoting it for a good number of years now. When I previously worked here as a licensing enforcement officer, we secured some funding and part funded, I think it was 21 CCTV systems back in the early days. So that was the cost of fitting, etc., was all discounted. And we did have some results from those. As you say, a runner in Enfield, for example, when the picture of the protagonist was shown to local officers, they instantly recognised who he was and had a result from it. So it is a useful system, a useful tool for the drivers as well as passengers. We have promoted it constantly, and you are going to receive a more detailed piece of work regarding it later in the year.
Thank you. I mean, apart from a rickshaw, there's not many forms of transport now where you're not permanently on CCTV. Whether you catch a train, a bus, a plane, the underground, you are on CCTV. Granted, there's no audio in many cases, but you are definitely on CCTV. And it seems strange that you know, we have concerns about doing it with the taxi trade. All right, I think that's probably done that to death.
Councillor Page has his
Can I
hand
take
up,
you?
Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tim. I can't even see you now. Where have you gone? There you are. Hello, top left-hand corner of the screen. Tim, I do beg your pardon.
Yeah.
Please carry on.
I'm here.
Thank you, Rosemary.
Well, I get the feeling that we're constructing a good policy for visible and compliant drivers. How are we going to protect the public from non-licensed drivers? I mean, do we have a role to play in that? Is there anything we can do?
I think that is a fabulously important point. And obviously, Uber is the one that springs to mind because we get all sorts of people rock up. But equally, anybody that stood in a queue for a taxi, you'll notice that there's always the odd strange car pops up. And somebody opens the door and says, taxi, and the bloke says, oh, yeah, and they all jump in. They haven't got a clue. Absolutely haven't got a clue. So, yeah, Oliver, good question.
We have in the past, and will continue to do in the future, done test purchasing in nighttime operations. So part of this is also we're looking at cross authorisation with other Hertfordshire local authorities, because often the plying is done by someone who's had a journey into Hertford or Bishopstorfer, for example, from outside of the area, and then thinks that they'll cheekily pick up a piece of work on the way out. So we don't have the powers to inspect those vehicles and talk without authorisation by their home authorities. So we do conduct operations, we do respond to intelligence, and we do share information with other local authorities, both inside and outside of Hertfordshire. So we do our best, but it's a very difficult thing to deal with.
But I have to say, let's blow our own trumpet and beat our own drum for a moment. Because of the support we've given our officers over the years, you know, considerable work is being done, and it's in this report elsewhere, with working with other authorities within Hertfordshire and beyond to start to bring standards to a common level, practices up to a common level. And that's all emanated from, a lot of that is emanated from the support that we have, as a committee, have given our licensing team. And I know they acknowledge it and recognise it and are pleased with it. So I hope you will continue to do that and support our executive member and our licensing team with some of the more interesting and challenging decisions that we need to make. We only keep on top of it by keep moving forward. Not to move forward is to go backwards, which is why I'm very keen that we should constantly push. And I think certainly as far as the taxi trade is concerned, CCTV is going to be a big part of the future. And I hope I can bring you with us on that. Okay, can I take you? We've got Appendix A is where all the recommendations lie. Can I take you to that and ask for your support with those recommendations? Could you indicate, wave, nod, say agreed, whatever? Give me. Okay, thank you. Chris, that looks good. Is that unanimous? It looks pretty much. I didn't see Stephen's hand go up, but that may just be I was looking at. You did. Thank you so much. I think that's unanimous. We'll take it as unanimous. Thank you so much.
Sorry, Chair. I'll need a proposal.
Okay, yeah, I'm happy to propose from the chair. Would somebody be kind enough to second, please?
Happy to second.
David Snowden. Thank you very much, David. And I have to say, once again, thanks for that, Oliver. A good report and timely. So we go now to page 88, item 7, which is a report from Claire. Is Claire with us this evening, Oliver? Are you going to talk us into this as well?
Unfortunately, you've just got me again, I'm afraid.
Well, no, that is unfortunate because I was going to thank Claire for an excellent report. So would you please pass on my thanks? And hopefully at the end of the evening, the committee will agree with me. It's a bit numbers, but none the worse for that. Oliver, talk us through it quickly, if you will.
I will do, Chair. The report's for information only, as members are aware, so that you can see what the licensing service is doing, see the sort of numbers of licenses we're dealing with, and the actions we're taking and work going forward. I'm not going to go through the report verbatim, but I've just picked up on some of the points that have been raised by members previously, or I think are of particular interest. So if I just run through those briefly. We had some questions around street trading and when it would be transferring over to the licensing enforcement team. And that will be from the 1st of April this year. So very shortly. There's been an increase in suspensions of drivers for failure to produce documents, but this is mainly related to COVID-19 and drivers not working. So we've had those discussions with them. We're happy to suspend the license till they're ready to come back. No one is driving without the appropriate checks in place. So that's a bit of reassurance for the public. We've been promoting the Travel with Confidence scheme, which is infection control training for all licensed drivers. So across the county now, with the last 2 authorities coming online shortly, so that'll be all 10 running it. We've got 1/3 of our drivers have now completed the infection control training, and we're looking to make it part of the update training they're going to do. So we should theoretically pick up every driver within the next 12 months. East Herts was approached by Watford, asking me to manage their licensing service part-time to assist them. We've reached an agreement with them. So as of 3 weeks ago, I'm now doing 2 days a week managing the Watford licensing team. One of the provisos was that we could provide adequate cover here, so none of our work suffered, and we've engaged someone appropriately to cover my time when I'm not here. And Brad is stepping up to take on the duties I would otherwise have been doing. When we look at the figures of licenses and applications, you can clearly see there's 240 less 10s in this quarter than the similar quarter of the previous year. Obviously, it's all COVID related again. We're dealing with the new pavement license regime, which had quite a low response. But with the with the use of outside areas going forward, we're expecting a few more applications, and the proposal is currently going through Parliament for the expiry date of that piece of legislation to be extended into 2022. So there may well be a spike of applications over the next few weeks in the lead up to April the 12th. I've been working quite a lot on the statement of licensing policy recently, drafting parts of it. We have a number of reference groups and have engaged with the responsible authorities. The timeline for it coming into force is on page 99 of the agenda. It'll go via licensing committee to executive to full council. Added to the list of concerns that are detailed in the report following conversations with the police at the CSP meeting are of particular interest: late opening takeaways and off licenses within Hertford, those premises that stay open later than the on premises do. If members, I said this last time, but if members have any thoughts about the existing policy and the nighttime economy position statement, please drop me an email. I've had some really useful feedback from members so far. It's great to have, and that'll all go into the drafting of it before we go to the consultation. If the Appendix B of this part of the report, there's been an increase in applications for new licenses, but new premises licenses. But again, this is COVID-19 related, with premises trying to make changes so that they can sort of diversify and survive during this period. It's not a series of new nightclubs proposing to open at the end, or a series of public houses. It's generally people trying to sell alcohol or moving into late night refreshment for takeaway or delivery. The number of applications for small society lotteries has dropped, but I imagine that's because events aren't happening due to COVID, because they were needed for school raffles and things like that. And over the last year, for the first time in a number of years, we've seen a drop in numbers for all types of hackney carriage and private hire licenses. This has been gradually decreasing since February of last year. Again, it's all COVID related, but we've put measures in place for those people that are drivers that are shielding or don't feel happy to work. We've put measures in place to allow them to renew as things get better, so that they're not disadvantaged. Because we had, I know the chair agreed, we've got a cap on the number of hackney carriages that we allow to license, and that's a diminishing cap. But those that have expired will be allowed to come back in as an exception to the cap with the same vehicle or a better vehicle when they're ready. If there's any questions about any of the other detail in the report, I'll be happy to take them.
That's a good canter through, Oliver. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And you can take a bow because of that, the work that I alluded to earlier around bringing taxi licensing standards to a common level, hopefully a higher common level for many in Hertfordshire and elsewhere. I know the work that you were doing with Uttlesford some years ago hopefully has come to fruition there, but certainly it's the way to go. Whilst we don't have a unitary, and possibly hopefully never will have a unitary, we can have a virtual unitary, and we can have similar and very closely corresponding standards across the piece. Could I just, from the chair, take advantage of my position and just ask you about scrap metal licensing? I still unfortunately read too many reports of metal going missing. Do we have many of those in our bailiwick?
We have a very low volume of sites and collectors. So yeah, there's not many licensed. Where we get intelligence about someone operating as a scrap metal collector or selling stuff on, we either pass it on to the police or deal with it and try and get them licensed. I manage the environmental enforcement side as well, so often they're involved in operations where they'll stop a lorry that has a large amount of metal on the back. We've successfully got a couple of people that weren't licensed to get waste carriers licensed and various other authorisations recently, so they're now doing things legitimately. But yeah, like all local authorities, it's a very low level of them.
Okay, that's good to know. All right, Ben, I can see your hand there, sorry.
That's right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I had a quick question about page 97 of the Appendix A. You make reference to a decision of the licensing subcommittee about the review of the Jungle Bar premises that was appealed, and the matter was settled by consent order. And I just wondered if you could say something about that. Thanks.
Yes, so the Jungle Bar appealed the hours and conditions that they were granted by the licensing subcommittee. In the lead up to that appeal, negotiations were entered into where the conditions remained or were slightly stricter, but they were given slightly more hours than had been granted by the licensing subcommittee. So it wasn't what they'd originally requested, but it was a little bit more.
I can fill in a little bit on that. It ultimately came to me, and evidence was presented which overwhelmingly suggested to me that the course of action we took, which was to meet them halfway, was the appropriate way to go. So it was given very, very careful and due consideration. I'm looking around, I can't see any. Norma, yes, welcome. Norma, the floor is yours.
It's about the waste carrier's license. I'm a little bit confused.
Oh, yes.
We still have the rag and bone man at Thornford, and he comes round. He doesn't give goldfish away now, but he still comes round and takes fridges and stuff like that. They're mainly travellers. Do they have to have a waste carrier's license, or is there are they exempted?
Essentially, if you're taking someone else's waste, you need the appropriate authorisations to do it. So there's various levels. So there's a low-level licence, which is essentially a notification to the Environment Agency, all the way up to larger people that are trading. But cash shouldn't be changing hands if it is.
No, no cash.
And they should
no
have
cash,
an
no goldfish.
They should have an authorisation for carrying other people's waste.
Right, because the stuff's left out. They don't actually enter premises or garages to get it. The stuff is either on the pavement or just in the driveway. Is that the same, Oliver?
Yeah, it should. If you're taking someone else's waste, you should still have an authorisation. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you for that.
James, hello. Good evening, James. What
Good evening.
What have you got for us?
Just as an aside, with my litigation solicitor hat still on, as well as not taking waste unless you've got a waste carrier's license. As a person whose waste it is, you should also not be giving it to someone who doesn't have a license. So it's on both sides as well. So don't think that it's only on the person taking the waste. There is also an obligation on the person whose waste it is to check and not to pass it on unless that's been carried out as well.
Yeah, the dreaded fiduciary liability. Could I just? I've long been concerned about this because some of this comes from the Environment Agency, and you know, I've been concerned for some time that we should issue a door side badge, as we do for cabs and hackney carriages and what have you. You know, even if it's a magnetic one that they slap on the side of their door, so that there's something very clear that the member of the public, the resident, can actually see that there is a license and there is a number and there is a date. But that seems to fall between the cracks. Perhaps Oliver or James could comment on that, because again, that's something I would like to push forward without putting too much expense into it. It strikes me as an anomaly that we have to know all about the taxi, but we don't have to know about the waste collector.
So, Chair, there is we do issue for collectors a license that goes in the window of the vehicle. It's not like a big taxi sign or a door sign, but in addition to that, which is not a requirement of the law, we provide them with a badge in a similar way that we would provide a taxi driver with a badge. So that's above and beyond the legislation. So that our collectors should be wearing that when they're going round as proof that they're licensed. The issue you would have is we could do it, and we may issue 20 door signs to collectors, but collections from other areas that aren't licensed to collect here wouldn't be doing the same thing. So you'd be able to identify the good ones if you wanted to, but it still wouldn't help us to enforce against those that aren't doing the right thing.
Yeah, it just strikes me. Thank you for that. That's illuminating. It just, yeah, I've been aware of that. It just strikes me there's an anomaly there, and there's a heavy liability on the resident, and many have been caught out. And you know, perhaps there's some work we could do there with residents just to remind them that they need to check that these people are properly badged and authorised. Otherwise, they have a liability. They're not aware of that. Norma.
I wasn't. Oh, sorry, Annie. Oh, I am. I was going to say I'm unhinged. I feel like I'm unhinged. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't aware of it because we don't know when the rag and bone man's coming, and people just leave out things for him to pick up. So I wouldn't think of checking for a waste collector's license. I would just leave whatever it was, a fridge or something, at the top of my driveway, and he'd come and take it. And that happens with other people as well. So I don't know if there's something we can do to make people aware of this, or is that going to end up with more stuff being dumped in the countryside?
Well, I mean, it is a problem, isn't it? I mean, those were happier days, some would suggest, where the totter came round and it was a different and more carefree time. But yeah, there is a fact that, you know, that somebody will rock up, say, "Oh, I'll take that away for 40 quid." And the next thing you know, your 40 quid's worth and somebody else's 40 quid's worth and a couple of hundred quid's worth from the estate around the corner ends up in a country lane as a fly tip. And that leads to all manner of problems. So the trouble is that there's too many agencies involved in this. I think perhaps we should lean on our members of Parliament. Perhaps we could feel a letter to Julie coming on to ask if consideration couldn't be given when Parliament has time for these things to making that system a little less leaky. But good points. Thank you for that. I'm looking around. I can see. I've got to be careful because I keep getting caught out. So I'm very conscious. Are we content?
Yeah, I'm content. I've got my hand up there, David. But
hello, Ken. Yes, I can barely see it. It's the same colour as your background.
Oh,
that's why it's camouflage.
Tory blue.
There we go. Go on.
No, just quickly, but it's funny. I've got that experience. I had to clear my mother's residence when she passed, and I had a house clearance chap turned up, and I actually asked to see his license. And he said, "Do you know what? You're the first person in 5 years that's ever asked me to see my license."
Yeah.
So, I mean, and that panorama programs about the litter picking, the fly tipping. We've got to do something, and if we can make this put something, you know, our waste pamphlets we've been sending around about the charging for bin collection and all this sort of thing. We could put something in that to start educating the public about the need to check for these licenses.
Well, it's too late now, but the Easter hangers have probably been printed already. But the next time we have, you know, bank holiday weekend in August, maybe something on the hanger that goes out on everybody's willy bin. You know, that could be a way forward. But I think it is. It's about informing people of the concerns that we have. And Ken, you and I both know, and I'm sure others here do as well, the major issues we have from time to time with fly tipping. It can really be a big problem. You've been a victim of it. I've been a victim of it. Many of our residents have. It's a big challenge. It is undoubtedly a big challenge. Okay, if I can I take you now to page 89 where the recommendations lie, and we have 2A and B. The members review and comment on the licensing activity from Q3 of 2020 and review and comment on the proposed work plan for 2020-2021. If you're content, would one of you be kind enough to propose?
Happy to propose.
Rosemary proposed, David Snowden second. Thank you so much. That's very good. That is the business for this evening. My thanks
Are
to
we voting?
Yes, please. Well, I'm assuming everybody's nodded. Yeah, do you want to vote? Yep, yep. We're all agreed. Yep. Sorry, I assumed everybody was content with that. That is the business for the evening. Thank you very much for your attendance and attention. And we'll do it all again very, very soon. We look forward to various bits and pieces coming forward as officers develop other pieces of work that we've asked them to do. And it just remains for me to reinforce my thanks to Claire for that report and for Oliver for joining us this evening and talking us through it so well. Many thanks to you all. A very good evening. And sorry, Will, did you want to?
Just want to say, just to confirm then, that there isn't any urgent business, just to formally cover off that.
There's no urgent business, no. I'm not aware of any. No. Nobody's got an urgent look on their face. I'm checking.